Okay. Hello, everybody. It's good morning for me. I'm in Buenos Aires, Argentina, but it might be a different time for you. I'm Vicky Saumel. I'm the joint coordinator for the IATEFL Learning Technologies SIG. And this is one webinar in our webinar series, which started in April with Fridays, with webinars every Friday. And we have now moved to a monthly webinar once a month on Saturdays, okay? We are very to be bringing the year to a wrap up. This is our last webinar of the year. And we are busy planning what we are going to offer next year. So for starters, in January, we are planning to have a Zoom meeting with anybody who would like to come and join us to talk about what you would like from the SIG, what you expect from the SIG. We will tell you who we are, what we are doing, and we will ask you what you expect from us so that we can plan a more productive year for 2021. In February, we are going to have an online conference with the authors of our research book. So stay tuned for news about that. And to get started, I would like to let Raquel, our social media manager, introduce Raphael.
Thank you, Vicky. Hi, everyone. So I'm Raquel Ribeiro. I contribute to the SIG as social media manager. And it's a great pleasure to introduce my colleague, Raphael Webster. We work together in Cultura Inglesa, São Paulo. And Raphael has been an English teacher for about 6 years, and he's very active as a teacher and researcher. He's currently part of the e-learning team at Cultura Inglesa, São Paulo. He holds a master's degree in applied linguistics, and he has presented his research projects in different conferences, such as IATEFL and Brastiço, our conference here for Brazil. And he focuses on the use of technology for pedagogical objectives and purposes. So, welcome, Raphael.
So, hi, everyone. Are you listening to me? Can you listen to me well? Yeah. So, thank you, Raquel, for introducing me. So, let's start here. Can you see the presentation? Yeah. Good. So now it's in a full screen mode. So, hi again. So, the webinar today is going to be on promoting and maximizing interaction digitally. As Raquel mentioned, I like researching on the topic of technology and how we can use this in a pedagogical oriented way. So everything that I try to do with technology, I don't focus a lot on theories. Of course, I know that this is important, but I like to see the practicality of this happening in the classroom, right? So this is what I like showing to people. So this is what we'll be doing here today. In terms of the content that I'll be covering, it will be the types of interaction. So I'll be talking a little bit about what is to be a platform-oriented and what is to be people-oriented interaction, right? So when I'm talking about people-oriented, I'll tackle through online platforms. So I will present them in a moment. And then after talking about these types of interaction, I'll go for the role of interaction through the views of technology and learning, but I'll use the views of technology and learning from Cultura Inglesa, which is where I work. And after that, I'll go for promoting interactions at different phases of a lesson with or without technology. So how can we go for interactions using the platforms that I'm going to mention, and some suggestions on how to deal with some activities in the classroom. And then after that, we go for the takeaways and the Q&As, right? So going for types of interaction, we have the platform-oriented and then we have people-oriented. So when I'm talking about platform, I'm talking about actually Google Jamboard, Google Docs, Google Keep, Zoom Chat, and many other ones that you probably use, right? So from this list here, what I like using the most is Jamboard, Google Docs, Zoom Chat, Padlab, Quizlet sometimes. I don't like Pear Deck very much, but I know that some people love it. And then we have quizzes, and then we also have many other ones, but I just like to use these 3 ones here the most because I am like more familiarized with them one. So when we have here these platforms, one question that comes to our mind is, what do students gain from using these platforms? I was thinking about some things and I came up here with this very short list. Obviously, we have much more, but when we are using platforms, we can get like students familiar with the tools for practicing vocabulary, reading, listening, or whatever. So they are learning to learn. So they have this learning to learn moment. They can practice writing, reading, but in a sense of sub-skills. So we can like go for sub-skills in this way. Students can get familiar also with the tools that may become models for them to use in their daily basis. So for example, if I start using Mentimeter in my classroom, students might use at work, for example, because they know how to use, they know how the outcomes that he can or she can expect. So that's what I say, like become models to be used on a daily basis. And also that the students feel empowered and engaged to create. So when we use platforms at work, students might use it later on so they can start their own creativity, not just in the classroom. So we have more things that we could put here, like from using these platforms, but these were the basically ones that I could think of, right? So talking about interaction, as I mentioned, we have 2 types with the platform. And when I'm talking about the interaction with the platform, I mean like we have one person interacting with a platform. The name here in this black squares, it's called server, but let's take this as platform. So in the first one, we have individual and interacting with the computer. The second one, we have 2 individuals and they are interacting with a sort of device. And then we have again, and then we also have a B group interacting. But what's happening here in this image is that they are interacting with the platform and receiving feedback from the platform. And if you look at the image D, for example, here that we have like lots of people, we have 6 people here. They are interacting all with the same platform and they are receiving feedback. I don't know if you know Kahoot or quizzes. So for example, when you play them in the classroom, so when students play with this platform in the classroom, they are all playing all together and they are receiving feedback from this platform. But what's happening here is that students, they are not interacting among themselves, right? So they are just using the platform and then receiving feedback, but the communication is not happening here. So the interaction between them are not happening. So that's why we can have another type of interaction, which is through the platform, but with people, which means that we have the platform, we have people interacting with this platform, but students, they are communicating among themselves, right? So this is the difference between using these 2 types of interactions. And I'm not saying that using one or using the other one is wrong, but my point is, how can we use technology in a more effective way, in a way that we can combine both ways of interacting in a platform? And then here, the views of technology by Cultura Inglesa is that technology should be seen as a pedagogic-oriented way, right? So if I'm using like quizzes, for example, in my classroom, obviously it's pedagogic because I planned this, I want an outcome. And then also it has to be collaborative too, to maximize students' learning process. So if you look at the image D, for example, they are collaborating here, they are maximizing learning process there, they might be learning something in the process of interacting. And in number 3, we have to foster learners' communication skills. So I don't know what type of platform we might use, but for example, if we use Google Docs, students might be typing, right? So it's a type of communication, not necessarily just like practicing their speaking, for example. And also it has to help students to bridge social and ability gaps. So it has to include everyone that it's participating, right? So this is the field of technology, which correlates to the, oh my goodness, I'm seeing myself here, which correlates here in the interaction with the platform, which I don't say that it's wrong, right? But if we move here a little bit, in our institution, we also have the views of learning that I share it myself, right? So language should be seen in a context that is relevant to them. So if I'm thinking here, if I'm using the platform, is the language that presenting there, being presented there, is it relevant for students? For example, if you just entered in a platform that you just have to practice whatever, is it really relevant? Are students really in a context that they are going to use the language? And in second one here, we have language work through interaction. So, and then when I say here interaction, I'm actually talking about students interacting among themselves, which the technology also permits, right? It allows us to do so. And in number 6 here, we have, they are giving opportunities for genuine use of the language in context. When I say genuine use of language, it's to use the language without being controlled by the teacher. So I'm not providing anything for the students, but they are just using the language as they want to. So let's call this emergent language as well. And then 7, language is seen as a means of communication. So it has to have a purpose for them to communicate, right? So it's not just doing something for the sake of doing something. It has to be something more meaningful, right? So it's not in merely isolated items. So it has to promote communication through the genuine use of the language. So my question is, how can I integrate both ideas, right? So these views of learning, views of technology, and also these interactions here. So the solution that I came up with was to have the platform interaction. So students are interacting through this platform. But when students are doing so, for example, in a Google Docs, they are generating content, right? So they are generating something, they are creating something, they are writing about their personal lives, they are probably speaking if they are using like voice recognition, but they are generating something, right? And when they generated something, we can use this content that they worked on to actually use for interaction with people. So in a first moment, students can work individually with the platform, right? There is no problem with that. They don't have to interact with each other. But after that, so they have a content to talk about, and then they can go and they can interact with people, but it does not mean that they are not using the platform. They are combining everything together, right? And then they have a means of communication here, because just using the platform, they generated something, okay, nobody's going to see it, nobody's going to talk about it. So let's make it work in a way that we can interact with this. So this was the solution that I came up with, how we can join all together and then use the technology in a more meaningful way so students can interact, and at the same time, students can maximize that interaction, right? And then, so talking about maximizing interaction, we can go for this in every stage of our lesson. At Cultura Inglesa, for example, we follow a certain type of scope. So we start with the contextualization, which means that we are going to engage the students, right? So it can be a leading, and then it can go for exposure, which can be like reading or listening, but it can be like skills development. So I can develop like skills from listening or reading. Then we can go for holistic noticing. When I say holistic noticing, it's analyzing language, right? So we can go for grammar, vocabulary, useful language, chunks, idioms, whatever that has to be analyzed. But it comes from a context, right? So it comes from the listening or it comes from the reading. And then after that, we go for practices, and then like from the language that we analyzed. And then we go for the skills development, we would be speaking, because every lesson we have a name, right? So, and then through this moment of the lesson, we would try to achieve this aim. So for example, talking about past experiences, they would probably analyze language to talk about their past experiences. They would go practice in a control, semi-control, and FRIA, and then they would go for a speaking, which is like for them to use the language genuinely, right? Although this is not so freer because this is still controlled, because I'm giving like the task, and then the students, I'm expecting students to use a certain type of language, right? So let's call it here less freer. And then my question is, should we maximize the students' interaction at any moment during during our lesson? How can we do it through the technology, right? And what are the setbacks that we will have to deal with maximizing interaction? So if I decided to get a platform and maximize my interaction in any stage of my lesson, what will happen? So we're also gonna have some setbacks here. And when I say maximizing interaction, it is promoting more. It's to go beyond what is expected from, for example, a course book or from winning an activity. And then when I'm saying like maximizing as well, is using here the content that the students generated to do so, right? And then also I have another thinking here. In any stage of our lesson, right, we might ask students to go in pairs. And I have here one quote from Simon Andrews. And then he says, group and pair work are so much part of our everyday teaching routine that we hardly pause to think before partitioning the class to tackle some particularly communicative tasks. So again, so interaction. And I added here the word meaningful, because what I thought, like while teaching online, especially asking students to go into the breakout rooms, that we didn't have any kind of purpose to go there, right? So some students, they would just go there, they would answer some questions, they would go back, and then they would tell the teacher. And then my question was how meaningful was that for the student? Was actually he was just practicing? How critical was that thinking? So my question is, how can we also transform this interaction in a more meaningful way? So we have here three things, right? So we have the platform being used in a more communicative way. So how to maximize, and also how to make this more meaningful. So the three things here that I'm gonna work, and I'm gonna show some examples of what I did throughout this year here on like teaching online, okay? So let's start here with focusing on our lessons. In our first point would be like engagement, like a reading. And then for this particular question here, we have the books, right? So some of us, we follow books, we follow materials. And then some of the questions there, they are like, oh my goodness, really that I have to ask that to my students? But it's not a problem, right? And here we have one leading, like to before starting the reading, and then it asks here, do you do any kind of handcrafts? What are they? So students might say no, and then the other questions like he might not answer. Have you ever tried origami? No, right? So these questions here might be really difficult for students to answer. And then I said, okay, what if I want to use this? And what if I want to maximize this interaction through this leading here that should take like probably some moment in my lesson? So I decided to go for the Zoom chat, and then we can ask students to post their answers on the chat, right? So try to say, even if it's no, so try to post your answers, right? And then after posting their answers on the chat, we can set students to go to the breakout room, and then we might make this task more meaningful if the students have to come to a conclusion in the end of it, right? So for example, how many people like said no? How many people said yes? So, and then they have something to do. It's not just going to the breakout room and then actually answering that questions, but actually trying to come up with something at the end of it, right? So this is a way of making this more meaningful. And then I'm using a very simple platform, which is the chat. The students can later take a photo if they have their cell phones with them, or they can have like a snapshot of their screenshot of their screen, and then they can go to the breakout rooms and then do this activity here, but they have a task in a more meaningful way, right? So this is a way of engaging students through the chat. What my point is here is students are generating content on the chat, so their answers will be there So we have something to work using the chat, right? If I move on a little bit, we can have here, for example, when I want to present some language to my students. And then this is also 3 books. So here we have some adjectives, and then these adjectives, it's for me to talk about films or entertainment in general. And then we have awful, disturbing, hilarious, uplifting, so on and so forth. And our automatic interaction in the class would be teacher talking to students in a way of giving instructions. Then we would have students, and then we have students working with the book, and then probably the platform if this is online, I don't know. And then students would check the answers with their students. So, and then after that, students would report their answers to the teachers, and then the teachers would talk to students as a final explanation here to analyze the language with them. So this would be like the normal way of going in a lesson. And my thinking was, how can I maximize it? How can I make this more interactive? So getting this idea from the book here, we can highlight the words, for example, and then we can ask students to find together words that are synonyms, for example, and then might teach them some chunks to negotiate. So in this way here, I'm promoting interactions among students. I'm asking them to go in the breakout rooms, for example, and then they have to talk. If they are via chat, also it can have the same, but I'm teaching something here beyond, right? And students write examples for those sentences next to the number. So after having this exercise completed, we can go and then students can write some examples. So what's boring, what's easy to remember, what's funny. So students can do this in this way. They can go to breakout rooms or work in pairs, trios, and then they can share their answers. So boring, what's easy to remember, what's dull, what's gripping, and then so on and so forth. This is a way of doing this without technology, but again, through the platform, because Zoom is a platform, for example, if you're using any other platform to go through this interaction with your students. But if I want to maximize it through the platform, I can do this in this way. For example, I selected the Jamboard, and then I got this work here. It's nothing for me, it's quite boring. So it's quite dull, it would be the answer there. And then I wrote it something. So Star Wars, sertanejo music. Sertanejo music is a very popular music here in Brazil, right? So talking to people about books. I just posted here some examples using the Jamboard. So, and then the students would come up with more examples for these situation here, right? And then after coming up with this, which is a contribution to all the topics, we can go a little bit further and students can defend their point of view, for example. So Star Wars does nothing for me, for example, it's quite boring. Okay, but there might be some students in the classroom that they really like Star Wars. So how can you defend your point of view? And then in these moments here, I'm using the content that they generated, but most importantly, I'm asking students to go for and use the language in a more genuine way. I'm not controlling anything, right? So we just created something, but the explanation is going above. So it's going beyond, sorry. Also, if I don't want to go in this debate here of point of view, we can go for a guessing game. Who thinks that Star Wars is quite boring or quite dull or sertanejo or whatever? And students can share and find people who has the same, and find people who have, sorry here for my, for it has here, who have the same opinion as theirs, right? So they can go in this way. So we can go for a simple activity here from the book, and then we can use the platform to maximize this interaction here through the technology. But the point is, I'm not just using the technology for the sake of using. There is a purpose after that, right? So it's not just going to be there in the platform and okay, bye-bye, see you later. No, let's go and try to do something else, right? Another possibility, for example, was with using the Jamboard. I had a group of B2 students and then and also B1, and then they had to go for a TBL task. When I say TBL tasks, because not the whole lesson that is TBL, is just part of the lesson that is a task related to TBL. right? So that's why I call TBL task. And then they had to go for projects in which how can we reduce food waste, because this was the topic. So, and then we used Jamboard to come up with some posters, and then after that students had to present their posters, their views that they created, and then it took the whole lesson basically. So from one simple activity, which was like how we can reduce food waste, they come up with all this, they have discussions, they had feedback. So with one simple thing, using the technology, we can make lots of things more in a way of maximizing. Also, they had to create questions. So for example, I love creating banking of questions. So for example, here they had to use extreme adjectives like boiling, like fantastic, like starving. So after volleyball game, I was starving, don't you? So some of questions here I had to correct as well. I've been exhausted, I can't sing. So how about you? So after having this bank of questions, they could ask each other. So instead of just asking students, oh, create 2 questions in your notebook and let's go to breakout rooms and then ask your questions that you created, he can have like a large amount of questions, and then students can communicate, they can interact a lot more, right, through these use. And the best part is everybody's contributing at the same time, right? After doing so, I also thought about this activity here, which is practice as well, but it's for me to practice grammar. And then students had to go for asking people, how did people wake up in the time? So we are trying to use past modals here to speculate, have past modals. And then, okay, our normal pattern of interaction in this, probably using the book, would be teacher, students giving instructions, students doing the exercise, so answering the questions and trying to use the target language. And then students would report to teacher, and then teacher would finish this task, right? So how can we maximize this practice here using this activity from the book? So my suggestion is that we can go scaffolding the task. First, the students brainstorm ideas to answer, right? So how did people wake up in the time before here? There were no alarm clocks, so they go brainstorm in groups. So there would be lots of communication going on there. And then they can write, after doing so, they can write the verbs into the participle, because it might be challenging for them to remember wake, keep, amuse, or do, especially the ones that are irregular. And after doing so, we can go for drilling the sentences, right? So they can drill the answers using the content that they generated, because they thought about what to say before. And then finally, they can answer the questions, right? So instead of just going in the normal procedure with the book, we can go in this way to promote interaction in a more meaningful way, let's say. But if I want to go a little bit beyond that, we can use Google Docs, for example. And in this way, each students can create more 3 questions. How did people, using how did people in Google Docs. But why did I ask students to create more 3 questions? Because always remember that I want students to use the language in a more genuine way, right? So if they go in these tasks, so on and so forth, they would just be using the language provided by them. But if I ask them like to use how did people, and then they create their own, they are using the resources that they have, and they are using the language that they have. And then probably mistakes will be made, and then we would go for some correction. And then again, in these docs here, students can have all the questions over there. Students can have all these questions, and then we have again a bank of questions, and students can go asking. So we have again another opportunity for students to interact through a platform, right, in a way that it's maximized. If I go, for example, for students that are basic students, we have here like A1, A2, and then we have here in the box, so true or false, right? So Great Britain is an island. So is it true or false? Students will probably listen to it before, they will decide if this is true or false. And then after that, student, the teacher would correct, right, the exercise. And before that, students would first check their answers. But here, there is a great opportunity for students, again, to communicate. So students can, you can teach students to create questions. So is Great Britain in an island? So an island, sorry. So students would go for this, and then we can teach them the chunks. Yes, I think so, or no, I don't think so. If it's a more advanced group, we can go for because the text says that, because the passage says that. And then this is a way of making them like share their answers in a more communicative way, in a more meaningful way. Because what I see is that when we ask students to go and share their answers, most of my students, they ask, why do I have to share my answers? Because they don't see the purpose of doing so. They don't see why they have to go for this. How do I learn from this? So we need to make the sharing moment a more meaningful way so students can learn for it. So they are practicing the language. They are using the language as a means of communication, even when I'm using here a true or false task. And in this one here in particular, I don't put any kind of platform because I don't want to maximize my lesson all the time. Sometimes I just want to use the book. I just want students to interact. And here we are all digital already, right? So I'm here in my computer, you're using yours, and then we are interacting, right? So using platforms sometimes might be overwhelming depending on the situations that we go for. So in this case here, we can maximize interaction without any kind of platform. So that's why I said in the beginning of the lesson that we can go with or without, right? But in all the examples that I gave to you, I started with no platform, and then I used the platform, right? Moving on here a little bit. So this is an activity that it's from Alex. So he designed this activity. So Alex is a colleague of mine. He also works at Cultura Inglesa. And then he came up with this brilliant idea of using Google Docs so as to work with reading in the classroom. Because this is a very awkward situation when we ask the students to read in the classroom. It's like 15 minutes that we don't do anything in front of the computer, and then we're just waiting for students to read. We don't know if they are reading because some of them, they're not with their cameras on. And then I said, okay, so how can we make that more communicative? So we can divide the text into different parts. We can put students into group, right? We can design a Google Doc. So we have paragraph 1, paragraph 2, paragraph 3, 4, 5, and 6, and 7. So for example, if the text is really long. And then students can work together so as to summarize the text. So they would go for a breakout room, students in trios, for example. They would read the paragraph. They would decide how they can come up with a summary of that paragraph there. And this is a way of actually working with the students paraphrasing as well. If we consider like B2, C1, and C2 students, they should be able to start doing it, especially if they are B2. C1, they should do it, actually, and then C2 definitely should do it, right? And then this is an engaging way of students talking, reading, and then working with reading that might seem as a little bit boring in the classroom because students don't like so much. They prefer like to go for speaking, right? So we can bring speaking into these reading activities over here. And then the most amazing thing is we can see everybody writing at the same time, right? We can see what they are producing. So because the most difficult part of breakout rooms is that when we enter in one particular, we cannot see the other one, so they cannot ask you for help. But when we have this activity collaboratively one, that the technology provides us to work everybody together. So this is amazing because I can go talking. So student 1, 2, 3, and then I can give feedback right away. So this word here might not be so appropriate. And then it's more interactive, it's more meaningful. It's easier for us to see what's happening with the whole class, right? And another example here, I'm showing here examples of C1 because I had most like C1 students this semester, but you can easily adapt this to any kind of group that you have, right? The idea is here, you just have to adapt this to your group. So the students have to go with animal verbs. So we are learning this. So for example, duck out of, so using the animal duck. And then in this one, we use the Google Forms in a very different way. because I don't know if you experience this, but sometimes we have to drill right word, so duck out of, and then it's very messy because all the voices start going overlapping the other ones, and then we cannot hear anything, and then we ask the students to put their mics off, and then I don't know if they are pronouncing this correctly or not. So my solution for that was to use Google Docs, and then we have there voice recognition option. So I asked the students to go to this doc. They had to go for this table here. They would type their name, and then they would go for the answer, and then they would have to say, what do you tend to duck out of? And then they would go working with the mini, but they would try to answer this in an oral way using the voice recognition. It worked super well. Sometimes the students were not pronouncing the word correctly, so the Google got the word in the wrong way, so they knew that they should pronounce that in a more articulated way, let's say. And then after that, again, I have lots of answers. We have like a full document with all the students' perceptions, and then we can go for a little bit more, right? So if students can go and find similarities, they can try to explain why. And then just to demonstrate how we can do this, I brought here a small video for you, right? Very short actually. And then so you can see all students working together, right? You are not going to listen to anything, but it's just for you to see how they can work all together using their voice, okay? In this example here in particular, the students are summarizing, okay? Well, I'm going to show you again so you can see again. So this is the most amazing thing when you're teaching online, that when we have a document then everyone can interact with, so we can see everything happening, right? So every student, they are working, and then we're seeing that we can correct that, right? Oops. Oh, how can I, oh. And then after that, I also use Padlab. This one here is the one that I love the most. So I love this platform. So students, I had like a 2 group, and then we were talking about festivals around the world. It was a project that we were carrying out in the class. So it took like 3 classes, and our final project was to write about a festival that they would like to go. And then one student wrote about Mexico, the Day of the Dead. They wrote there. And then students would go in the Padlab, and then they would like pin the country and then write about the festivals they would like to go, and then some information, right? They were A2, so the text was very small. And then after doing so, they generated all the content. Students would go for chunks like, which one would you prefer to go? Why not? So very simple sentences, because they are not intermediate students, but they could go and say their preferences of going to these events, yes or no, right? Also, another option for intermediate students would be talking about their favorite films. So we have movie 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. So students would post photos. So we are generating here a catalog of films. And then also after that, students would go for their opinions. They can share their views, why they like these films. And then here, once again, I am promoting the genuine use of language, and I'm using here the technology to do so, right? But everybody worked together. Nobody was left out. And this activity here of festivals around the world was made by me, right? And this one here was a film activity by Alex, which I found actually amazing. And now getting this taking away over here of all these interactions, I asked you a question in the beginning. So should we maximize interaction at all stages of a lesson? And what are the setbacks we will have to deal with when maximizing interaction? And the thing is, there is room for maximizing interaction at any stage of my lesson. I can go for practice, I can go for listening, I can go for speaking, reading, any moment of my lesson, right? However, I need to bear in mind that we need to strike a balance between interaction and relevance. Is that relevant for me to bring interaction in this moment? Because again, sometimes we would go for that reading activity in the beginning of the leading one and would say, okay, go in groups, answer this question, let's come back. Okay, what are your perceptions? Is it really necessary for students to go in group at that time and then talk? Is it really relevant? So how we can bring relevance, right? So it seems to be the key here. It is the key. So the relevance for talking, the relevance for interacting. And then plus we need to bear in mind what's the platform that is being used for, right? So what is the platform that I'm using here? How can I come back? Oops. What's the platform that I am using and why I'm using this platform? Is just for the sake of using it? So don't use it because it's just going to be meaningless, right? So if you decided to go for a platform, we need to bear in mind that so it has to have an outcome. It's not just like, okay, let's have fun here. I don't believe in this. And what strikes me here a little bit is what we had like Kahoot. I don't know if you remember, but in Brazil, we had a moment that all the teachers were using Kahoot. And then the students were just answering questions, like testing students all the time. And obviously students had fun because it was a competition. But my question was, is it really like they are really learning? Like they are really interacting there? So how is that interaction? So it made me question, right? Probably they learned something. I'm not saying like they don't learn. But my question is how that is being really used, right? So we need to think carefully when we bring some technology to the classroom, because otherwise it's going to be meaningless again. So, and then also we have to have like the time constraints, because if I go back here, for example, in this activity, it's going to take some time for students to understand what is to work on a document online, how they can interact together, and then who is going to write. So probably a reading that would take like 15 minutes, it's going to take like 20, 25, 30, or much more, right? So maximizing this interaction in these moments here of my lesson will bring some consequences of most important, like the time. So when you have a plan, when you plan our lessons, it's really important to plan when we're going to use technology, how we're going to use technology, what are the activities that I'm not going to use. Because if I decide that in the spur of the moment, okay, now that's fun, let me use it here, the other activity that you plan that it's probably most essential for students to learn, you're not going to use. So we need to actually have this full picture in our mind so we can use platforms more consciously, let's say, right? Whew. And then here I am with Q&A. So do you have any questions that you would like to ask me?
I'm back on. Thank you, Rafa. I really loved it, and I was thinking about all the questions, and I was answering them in my mind. So if you have any questions, I haven't seen any questions posted on the chat, but if you have any questions now, we are here to answer. While we get the questions, we were talking about, people were commenting on Padlet and how great a tool it is. And I commented that since Padlet went, you only have a few Padlets for free. And if you run out of Padlets, there is a tool called Linoit. It's quite similar and it's totally free. It doesn't look as beautiful, I have to confess, but I have been using it and it works really well. So it's an option if you run out of your free Padlets. Joe was suggesting a couple of things too in the chat. He was reminding us that now on Jamboard, you can set your own backgrounds and change your backgrounds instead of having the solid color. Okay, we have a question, Rafa. I am not sure about the differences between the interaction you mentioned, B and C ones. They seem quite similar. Can you please elaborate on that? If you want to go back to the slide to show that. Yeah.
find this here. Interaction. BNC, yes, they are very similar. They are not different, right? It's just to show that we have like two different students interacting, right? So they're actually the same interaction, okay?
All right. Super. When I was listening to your explanation about many of the suggested tasks you gave, and I love all the ideas, it reminded me of the demand high movement and this idea that we sometimes rush through things because they are on the book and we have to cover everything. And we lose perspective on certain tasks that have so much more to offer. And so it's like staying on that one task and milking it out of all its possibilities sometimes.
Yeah, definitely. It was really good to hear.
So I think it became quite clear that the technology was not the focus too. And I think this is an important point to make, that the use of technology at all times was a tool to get to an outcome. Yes. And so the technology was not the main participant of the task, but only a way of doing it. Yes.
Yes. Does anybody have any other question or try to say one of your perceptions? Have you ever tried this in your lessons?
I have tried, well, I haven't done Google Docs in breakout rooms, but I've done Jamboard and it works almost the same. And sometimes what I do is I assign the same task on different boards. So in the same Jamboard, I do different boards for different groups to do the same task. And so they work on the Jamboard and you can easily see which group is working and what they're doing. And I think that the visual part of seeing them work is really useful.
Yes, this is why I love using the Google part, because we can see everybody working collaboratively. And then when they're using their box, we can not see anything. We're just like looking, okay, have you finished? All right, let's move on. So in that way, we can see what students are producing, what they're writing, where they're speaking.
And I also think that even if some groups work at different speeds, and a task is unfinished by a group, they can go back and finish it because the platform is there and the task is set. So this could also be good for some learners.
Yeah, that project that I did with the project of the festivals around the world, it was not done like all in class. So they started in class and then they finished at home. So the link was there available for them. So it was their homework. So, and then after that, they would have to go there and then they have to like it or make some comments. So it was part of their homework. So I didn't use the book as homework, so the workbook. So I asked them to go there and then finish their production, make some comments on students' festivals. So it was a whole process of like 3 lessons. So it took some time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, lovely. Joe is giving us another tip. Using grid view in Google Slides. Joe, would you like to tell us about it, how that works?
Yeah, sure. So basically, yeah, thank you for the presentation, Raphael. It was really interesting. Thank you. So basically the idea is that you have a Google Slides presentation that you share with these students, and then you assign different groups of students to different slides. And then if you have Google Slides in grid view, it means that you can then see how the slides are changing in real time. So it's similar to what you've said in Google Docs, but just doing it in Google Slides. And with Google Slides, you have more access to multimedia. So it's just it's a similar idea, but it's useful. And I've also put in the chat a YouTube video from Greg Kulowick, who I really rate in the States, who shows how you can set it up so you have a number of different presentations running at the same time, so the students can't see what each other is doing, in other words, in different breakout rooms. So you run a number of different Google slideshows at the same time, but then you can have the master slide that the teacher can see, whereby the teacher sees everyone's working differently, but the children can only see their own presentation, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And that sounds really useful.
But thank you. Yeah, that was what I was suggesting. Yeah.
Thank you, Joe. So do we have any more questions? Everybody's really quiet today.
Could I ask the question? How do you monitor engagement? So you're seeing by using these techniques, you're seeing that the students are engaged. But how do you monitor that? How do you have a record of their engagement? Is it through these sorts of techniques? Just see what I mean? So if because one question that I've been asked before is how do you monitor engagement within breakout rooms or within a Zoom session or in a video conferencing session? It'd just be interesting to know your thoughts on that. How do you see that the students are engaged, particularly if they're not allowed to turn their webcams on, for example?
As we use the Zoom platform, and then we have all the breakout rooms set, I would go in the breakout rooms, and then as I don't see them, because they don't like to turn their camera on, but they are speaking to each other, right? And then when I see like there's some quietness going on there, I ask if everything is okay, and then said, oh, okay, we're just writing. So this is the way, but I make sure that I go through all the breakout rooms and I make sure that everybody's participating, everybody's contributing. And then I ask students actually, how about like participation of person X? And then they say, oh, they participated, so on and so forth. So this is the way that I monitor their participation and their engagement in the lesson. And then also, if I didn't see a person talking at that time of like, they had like to produce something, in the moment that they all had to share, I would make sure that each student would contribute. So I would ask, Fulano, what's your perception of this presentation here, of this task here? So I invite a person like to talk. So this is the way that I try to embrace everybody in the conversation, even though they are not like participating there. So I try like to make sure that he contributed in a way in the classroom.
Yeah, this of course depends on the number of students you have in a class. And of course, the smaller the number, the easier it is to monitor and to make sure everybody is engaged and participates, right?
Yeah, usually my lessons, they have like 20, 21. So yeah. Same as mine. It's a lot of students. So.
It's a lot of students to monitor, yes.
But my lesson actually was 1 hour and 40 minutes. So I had time to actually go over all the students.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So Raquel, our social media manager, is asking you for a big favor, which is to turn on your camera so that we can have a selfie that we can use in our posts. So if you wouldn't mind, if you are available, you can turn on your cameras.
Yeah. So.
Hi, Vicky. Yay. Hi.
Very well then. So look at the camera and smile. Thank you.
Thank you, Raquel. And so if there aren't any more questions, we are planning to hold our next event on, let me get my calendar because my memory is a mess. Probably on Saturday, January 16. And as I said in the introduction, we are planning to hold a committee meeting telling you all about the IATEFL LTC, what we do, what we have done, and to hear you and listen to your opinions and to what you expect from us so that we can plan a better 2021. And so stay tuned to our social media channels, and we will let you know when that is going to be. So thank you all for joining us today. And I hope you have a lovely end of Saturday if it's late, and a lovely Sunday. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, guys. Thank you for your participation.
Thank you, Raphael. It was a lovely and very useful presentation.
Thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Raquel, as well.
Okay, everybody, we'll stay in touch. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.